For God so loved the world. Let's focus in on the world. So when we think about how the topic of the world has been developing, this is the fourth usage in the Gospel of John out of 78 in this Gospel and 24 in his letters. The Apostle Paul, in contrast, uses the topic world 47 times. Very prominent theme, and in the Gospel of John, we see that the true light, which gives light to everyone, in verse 9 of chapter 1, was coming into the world. In other words, for God so loved the world, within the world itself, there is no light. The light has to come from outside of it. And then what we are noticing is that once this light, in verse 10 of chapter 1, when he was in the world, and the world was made through him, yet the world did not know him, we find the initial inklings of a rejection. So we can be all excited about loving all world, like Jesus and like God loved the world. But what we need to realize is that this world is not neutral. It is actually antagonistic. It actually turns around and bites the hand of the one who feeds it. In the third usage, the disciples say, "Behold," they're talking about Jesus, "the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world." John the Baptist recognizes Jesus as being able to do something that would be sufficient for the whole world, who takes away the sin of the world. In other words, even though the world is large, and some places we have islands that we've never been to, and we have some places and cities that are very obscure, off the beaten track, and yet all of them come and fall under this category of the world that has sin, and that Jesus Christ, the Lamb of God, can take away the sin of the world. So, we think about the world, we have to think about darkness, and we have to think about the light of Jesus Christ coming into it. So, when we think about loving our world, we have to think about Jesus' invitation to this world. And basically, in verse 39, when he first discusses with the disciples, he says to them, they say to him, Jesus asks them, "What do you want?" This is in chapter 1, verse 37. What do you want? The disciples want to follow him. What do you want? I think we need to, in the presentation of the gospel to the world, find out what exactly they want. And so I think what they want is the invitation of Jesus to say, "Come and you will see." In other words, you won't find all your answers up front, but you need to start following. So the world and responding to the light is by increments. And this incremental notion is picked up again later on in chapter 7. If anyone who chooses to do the will of God, verse 17, will find out whether my teaching comes from God or whether I speak on my own. In other words, getting to know who Jesus is in this world requires us to just start following the things we understand and then keep walking, and we will find out more. In this video, I've tried to make you aware that when we think about the world, we think of a place that is not neutral, that is antagonistic. We need to think about one that is not receptive. We need to think about our cities. As much as we think we have good news, as much as we think we want to allow all people to participate in that which God so generously wants to bestow on the people, we need to realize we are going to suffer in that world. We're going to be rejected in that world. And yet we find God's love for that world, even though He created that world, and even though that world turned around and bit the Creator's hand, God still keeps moving forward. So you have to ask yourself the question, if I tried one time, if I tried two times, how many times should I keep trying to try to make the good news for the people in my city? In what manners should I keep trying and persisting? And so what we find is that John 3:16 gives us a history of an antagonistic world, that God so loved that He gave His one and only Son, that whoever believes in Him shall not perish. And what we read in verse 17 and 18 rounds it off. God did not send His Son into the world to condemn the world. The world was already condemned. The world begins lost and gets saved. Because the storyline is this: we walked out of the garden. So it's not, why does bad things happen to good people? No, it's, why does anything good even happen to us bad people? And that's what John 3:16 says. Whoever believes in Him is not condemned, but whoever does not believe stands condemned already, because they have not believed in the name of God's one and only Son. This is the verdict. Light has come into the world, but people loved darkness instead of light, because their deeds were evil.